Hello. Thank you for joining me with Secrets of the Bible again. We were off to a fast start last week, and I realized that I threw a lot at you. So we're going to do a little review today. We're going to see um, again some of the things that we covered, and we're going to talk about where we're heading in our Bible study. And I'll even tell you a few of the secrets of the Bible that we're about to explore together. But I just wanted to say thank you. Uh, Miss Karen and I are up in Wisconsin, seeing the grandkids. We'll be there for a week. I'll be back on Sunday. Obviously, you can access this video whenever you want. We'll be back, and I'll be back in the office on Monday morning. We will be joining you per usual on Tuesday for our Bible study, and we'll explore some more that is yet to come. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that's going to be a bit later in this video. First of all, we have to do something very important, don't we? We have to light our candle. Very important to me that we do this. As I said to you, we're here not just to grow intellectually, but to grow in faith and grow closer to God. And this is for me, a symbol of the light of Christ that I pray will burn brightly in your life and in mine as well. So let us get started. Last week, I asked you a little bit about first images, first impressions about the Bible. And a number of you talked about very positive impressions, said that it was something that you learned the biblical stories early, you learned about God's love for you, and so on. That was wonderful. And we even talked about how it still informs and impacts your life today. Even Dr. Sheila was talking about when she's with the kids in Sunday school and they run across a very difficult word, how they handle that, and they kind of laugh and go on. That's the most important way to handle it, and I appreciate that. Tim Smith said that the Bible was very daunting. No doubt, very daunting for all of us. That's right, even for the good minister. There are, as we said, many books of the Bible, and we can remember that in this book, there are a collection of books. In the Protestant Bible, there are 66 different books of the Bible, written by over 40 different authors in 3 different languages. Think translation problems. From 3 continents. Think cultures over a couple of thousand years. These kinds of things present us with problems when we translate the Bible into English and then seek to understand what it is that God is trying to tell us. Well, also, and this is critical to understand, that because we have 66 different books, we don't have one uniform story. We have lots of stories when it comes to the problem of suffering. The Bible doesn't offer one answer to that problem. It gives us many answers. When we look at God, we get various views of God, not just one image of God. Remember when Byron raised his question at the end of our conversation last week, and he said, I'm troubled by the fact that this God of the Bible is very violent. So I think what Byron was saying to us is that he struggles to put the God of the Old Testament together with the God of the New Testament. That suggested to me that Byron is thinking and that he is engaging his good brain to read these stories honestly. Well, Ernie Stevens came up to me after the Bible study last week and he said, Jim, I just have to tell you, when I read the Bible, and I find something that is a bit troubling to me, I know to sit up and take notice, because I know then that it's not just me reading the Bible for what I want it to say, but I actually use that discomfort oftentimes to see what God is saying to me. I thought that was a really good standard to use, and I wanted uh, to bring that to your attention, and maybe you would find the same thing. There are different viewpoints. I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's go to the birth stories of Jesus. There are four gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Did you know that the story of Jesus's birth is found only in two of those gospels, Matthew and Luke? The Gospel of Mark doesn't include any story of Jesus's birth, nor does the Gospel of John, just Matthew and Luke. And do you know that in these Christmas stories that we put all into one big uniform story come Christmas time, complete with snow and donkeys and sleigh bells, none of these things which are included in the Bible. But we have some differences and distinctions from Matthew's story and Luke's story. I'll give you a couple examples. In Matthew's gospel, there are no shepherds that come to worship at the manger. There are only magi. And in Luke's gospel, there are no magi or no three kings that come to worship baby Jesus, only shepherds. That's right. And we'll talk about that in days to come. There's a very significant reason why that's the case. It fits the theology of Matthew's gospel and the theology of Luke's gospel. So there are important secrets or reasons why that's the case. Let's see, what else could I tell you? In the Easter story at Christmas, we usually put everything together into one big story. But for example, let me give you an example of something. In Matthew's gospel, let me see if I can find this. In Matthew's gospel, uh, there is uh, Mary Magdalene at the empty tomb and the other Mary, as the gospel says. And there is what they find, one angel, just one angel these two women find. In Mark's gospel, there is Mary Magdalene, there is the mother of Jesus, whose name is Mary, and there's Salome. So now there's three women at the empty tomb. And what they discover is not, as Matthew says, one angel. They find one young man. Now you may say, Jim, maybe it's just the same thing. Fine. Why don't they say it in the gospel? There may be reasons for that. In Luke's gospel, Luke is different than Matthew and Mark, and Luke has a number of women at the empty tomb and two men, not a young man, not an angel, two men. Are these significant differences? Not necessarily. Are these contradictions? Let's cut to the chase. Is the Bible contradicting itself? I don't think so. You may talk to friends who say, well, you can't trust the Bible. There are contradictions in them, like the people that are at the empty tomb. These aren't contradictions. These are, as we said, different perspectives and different ways of talking about the one story. We're going to talk more about that, but you should know that just because there are magi that come versus shepherds, or there is one angel versus two men, there's ways of understanding that really put this in context. Don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid of others that would challenge you on your faith in those ways. The key is this. Very important that you hear this. The key is to read these stories humbly and to be informed as best you can. Now, sometimes I find that it's best to take what I call a 30,000-foot view. You remember that we get so caught up in the trees that we forget and we can't see the forest? The 30,000-foot view is really critical for me when I approach these 66 different books written by all these authors, all these languages, all these countries over many, many years. Instead of getting caught up, as it's easy to do, in the trees, let's rise above and let's look down on the whole story and see if one particular story that we may be reading is, in fact, in sync with the big total story. Okay? Now, there's one easy way for us to take a look at that. And as I mentioned to you last week, let's see if we can see what it's called. I call it the 4 C's, and I think it's a good way to see the whole biblical story from a 30,000-foot view. Okay, let's see what it's called. The 4 C's are creation, covenant, Christ, and church. Some of you wrote that down last time. What it is, the 4 C's, I think, covers everything from the opening chapter of Genesis to the ending chapter of Revelation. Creation. In the beginning, God was brooding over the cosmos, and God was yearning to have a relationship. And in that relationship, God decided to created all that's in the world, all the animals, the sea, the land, all of this. And then you'll recall on the last day, God created human beings and said, this is very good, very good. God created for the purpose of having a relationship with you. Later in the Bible, we come into stories about Abraham and Noah, Moses and David, and all these covenants were established between these figures and God. And it was for the purpose of having a special relationship to then take that relationship out into the world and share God's love with everyone. That's the purpose of the covenant. And you can see that here. Well, God established covenants and tried to do a few things with us. God wanted to create us and form covenants with us to help us live healthy, full, meaningful lives. And God did something else along the way. You'll recall that God gave us instructions sort of in that metaphorical Garden of Eden. He said, here's what you can do, and don't do this, and life will be good for you. What did we do? We went against what God said. And so we were cast out of the garden in the story into what's called East of Eden. That's where life gets tough. In the covenants, God establishes these covenants. You'll remember when Moses came down off of the mountain, he had written tablets, these 10 commandments. And God said, let me write these down for you so you can see how to live. We didn't follow that. God said, let me make a covenant and send these messengers, what are called prophets, and these prophets will tell us to remember to hold to our covenant and to follow what God says to us about living full lives. And we didn't follow them. So what happened? is our third piece of our four C's. God sent Christ. God sent Jesus to show us what love is like and what God expects of us and calls us to do and to be. The final 4C is the church. And when we talk about who we are to be God's presence in the world. We are to be the church. And in doing that, we come to know something about the heart of God and God's will for our lives. We'll cover some more of this. I just want to give you a brush stroke today: creation, covenant, Christ, and church. Okay. Now, if I can get back here, let me see. Okay. What I want to tell you is about this secret, this second secret that we talked about. Let me see if I can get there. Um, Remember, we had talked about something else. We had talked about how the scriptures came to us. And what we're finding is that when they did come to us, they weren't written down, and this Bible didn't fall from the sky, as we said, red lettered, gold gilded, leather bound, ordered from Amazon. It came to us in a very unique way. And the more we understand about this, the more we'll know how to read the Bible, and we'll be able to see the secrets that are there. The secrets of how to understand the Bible, the secrets about reading it in a way that leads us to life abundantly. As Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Now, one of the secrets of the Bible is that whether we're speaking about the Old Testament or we're talking about the New Testament, in those early Hebrew and Greek manuscripts, it was all like one big run-on sentence. In Hebrew and in Greek, you got to listen to me, folks. It's one big run-on sentence because there were no, as we can see here, there were no capital letters. And they were all one letter after another. There was no ending. There was no punctuation. There was no periods. You didn't know where one word ended and another word began. Like this on the screen here. What does this say as you look at it? Is this God is nowhere? Is that what it says? Or does it say God is now here? I just use this as an example to help point out that when people were initially translating the early Greek and Hebrew, they had to make decisions about these things. And in fact, it was even more complicated than that. Let me go back here. Okay. Remember this one? It's a little more complicated to read. But as I said, there were no punctuation marks, right? No capitalization, so you didn't know where the new sentence began. There was no period at the end. There were no quotation marks. There weren't even commas. All it was a series of letters, unending, page after page after page. So when you would run upon a word in the Bible, this is a good example of what the early translators faced. What does this say? We said that there may be a couple of very different readings of this, right? For example, have you taken a good look at this now? Have you decided what you think this means? Let's see. Okay. Is it woman with is it woman without her man is nothing? That is, woman without her man, comma, is nothing, period? Or is it woman, comma, without her, comma, man is nothing? Depending on where you put the punctuation for this sentence, you get a different reading. Okay. I think it's just easier if I use this English like this to make that point. I can point out verses in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, where this is exactly what the translators faced. Now, why? Let's back up. Why is this important for us to understand? It's important for this reason. When the early, this is really difficult to explain. When people were translating the ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek, they had to make decisions. They had to make decisions about what gave the most accurate rendering of what the authors were trying to say. And to complicate matters further, there was not just one Hebrew text and one Greek text. There are thousands of Old Testament manuscripts that they had to choose from to translate, and there's 5,000 New Testament manuscripts that are that we had to choose to translate to get us to what we have today. If that sounds crazy to you, I can only tell you that people have spent their lives, scholars have spent their lives on one sentence, trying to bring to you the most honest, accurate translation. We'll talk more about that later, but I think we can trust this Bible, and I'll tell you really why I think that in just a moment. But suffice to say that once we got past those, you remember how I said that the Bible stories were first transmitted orally, right? They were stories that were told. And then they began to write them down on dry reeds, on animal skins, on pottery, on wood and ivory. But as you all know, those things can crack, they can be dropped, they can burn, they can deteriorate, but it's the best they could do. So what they finally had to do is, when they had a story on a piece of pottery, they would hire somebody to make a copy, right? And that copying was a whole story in itself, because when you were translating, say, the Gospel of Mark, it takes you a long time when you're etching into a piece of pottery. Sometimes they would fall asleep, they would wake up, and they would start translating again, maybe in a different place. We know that because we have these fragments and we have these texts, and there's a whole process by which we can accurately determine how things happen. So, what does this mean? For me, it means this. It is important to know how the Bible arrived at your doorstep, so you can have confidence in knowing that the stories in the Bible are very accurate. They're very accurate. And when it comes to taking a look, let's say, at the various images of God, is Byron's God an Old Testament God of wrath and violence, or is God a New Testament God of love and forgiveness? It will help you to engage that and determine for yourself. Okay, let's see. There was something else that you absolutely need to know about. Not only were there no punctuation marks, there was something else that let me get to you. there were no chapter and verse marks in the early Hebrew and Greek Bible. This is, let's see, I want to make sure I get you to the right page. Okay. Um, we had no chapter numbers in the Bible until 1205 AD, when a man by the name of Langton decided to do that for you. And then a few hundred years later, a fellow by the name of Estienne, Robert Estienne, put verses in. So they went back, they had a translation, and they went back and decided to put numbers in so that when somebody said, um, uh, hey, Darlene, look in your Bible and find John 3:16. Up until that point, they couldn't do it, but now they could. Or another favorite scripture for some people would be 2 Timothy 3:16. All scripture is profitable for us. All scripture is inspired by God. We couldn't find that until we had chapters and verses. That is clearly important. I want to tell you about a couple of game changers. One was in 1440 when a man by the name of Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press. Before the printing press, all we had were scribes making copies of copies of copies and making mistakes along the way, faithful as they were. Once we had the printing press, we could now make manuscripts. We could make copies of these pages, and we could put together a collection of pages and have an entire Bible within one book. This was a major, major, major game changer because now the ordinary person, if they had enough money to buy it, could have their own Bible, could read it for themselves and determine which stories of faith made great sense to them and how to interpret that. What else happened was, I'll just tell you this one. The other game changer was something you may well have heard of, and it's entitled, I keep going back to the wrong place. It's called the Qumran Scrolls, or what's known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, a little shepherd boy was watching over his flock of sheep, and they were up on this hill, and there were caves, and he thought his sheep went in there. So he picked up a stone and he chucked it into the cave. The strange thing is, he heard a sound that didn't sound like a rock hitting the back of the cave. It sounded much different, like maybe it had hit a clay jar. Well, he threw another rock in, and sure enough, same sound. Upon exploring these caves, we found about, I say we, scientists found 15,000 jars of, they found jars containing 15,000 different scrolls of mainly Old Testament writings. Why is this significant? Well, there was one scroll entitled the Isaiah Scroll. It was the book of Isaiah. It was 1,000 years old at that time from the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had at the time. When they compared the Isaiah scroll that in 1947 they had, that was the most authentic scroll that we had, and they looked at this scroll from the Qumran caves, it was almost identical. What did that tell us? It told us that when people copied over 1,000 years, that they copied these scrolls, they copied them faithfully so that we would have exactly as close to the older scrolls as we could have. That to me gives a lot of confidence in um, in the scriptures that we have and how it has come to us. Well, we did play around last time with a fellow by the name of William Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, as I said to you, was born in 1564, died in 1616. What's interesting is that King James had wanted a translation from the Hebrew and Greek into the King's English for his entire kingdom to have available. They began that translation in 1604 and finished it in 1611. 1611, 1610, 1611 was the year in which William Shakespeare turned 46. Some people wondered whether William Shakespeare, because he was in England and lived at this time, had any hand in the translation of the King James Bible. Well, we don't really know. But what we do know is if we take a King James Bible today and we turn to the 46th Psalm, the year you'll remember that William Shakespeare turned 46, the same year that the King James translation was finished in 1611. Shakespeare was 46 years old that year. And if we turn to the 46th Psalm and count 46 words into the Psalm, we find the word shake. And if we count 46 words back from the end of that Psalm, we find the word, you guessed it, spear. Shake, spear. And as I asked you on last Tuesday, was that a secret note from Shakespeare that he had a byline in this, in the King James version? Who knows? I just tell you because it's an interesting, fun story. It's not anything I'm going to bet the farm on. It's nothing that shakes my faith one way or the other. It's just a fun serendipity. And I wanted you to know about that. Oh, folks, I hope you're still with me. Couple of things I want to say to you, not just about the printing press, not just about William Shakespeare, not just about the Qumran scrolls, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about where we're heading in our Bible study, what we're going to be talking about. So let me see if I can tell you a little bit about some of these topics. There's something called the canon. Once we have translated all of these manuscripts and we've come to understand that we do not have a single autograph, meaning a single first edition of any book in the Bible, all we have are copies of copies of copies. Okay? And we have thousands of those that we have to choose from, of which we think is the most accurate reading. Once we've decided that we have a translation that we think is best authentic, we have to decide which books we include in the Bible. As I said, in the Protestant Bible, there are 66 different books. We have to decide, given that there are thousands of manuscripts, which ones we're going to include in our Bible. The early church had to make the same decision, as did the Hebrew community, which books would be the authorized list of books in the Old Testament, or what the Jews call the Hebrew Bible, and what Christians will call the New Testament. There are 39 Old Testament books in our Protestant Bible. There are 27 books in our Protestant New Testament Bible. So what are we going to do? I just want to throw something out to you. How many Gospels do we have in our New Testament? If you said 4, you're correct. We have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why do we only have 4? There were 70 other gospels circulating at the time that the early church decided to have four gospels and only four in the New Testament. Why did they not pick from these other 66 gospels? I'll tell you that secret perhaps this coming week. So there's that. We're going to also talk about why there are so many versions of the Bible. What's the difference between a translation and a paraphrase? I can tell you the secret about that as well. Are there contradictions in the Bible? Are those Christmas story and Easter stories contradictions, or are they differences? Maybe something to be admired, something to be understood. Is God male or is God female? What do we do with the talking snake? Remember that snake in the Garden of Eden? The one that said to Eve, "Oh, this apple's not going to hurt you." You ought to even give that fellow Adam a bite of it too. We'll ask questions about that. What's with a talking snake? Later in the Bible, we have a talking donkey. Did you know that? We have two talking animals. How do we understand that? And why can't we find Noah's Ark? People have been looking for that thing on top of Mount Ararat for decades. What's this stuff in Joshua about the sun standing still? And what's with the flood that if it truly covered every inch of this planet, it would mean that the water was over 5 miles high? How do we, as 21st century Christians, engage these stories? How did that sea part, the Red Sea, and the Israelites go through it with Moses holding up his cane? And what about Jesus walking on water? Do we really have to check our minds at the door as 21st century Christians when we read these pre scientific stories? Or is there a better way? A way in which we can engage our minds as well as our hearts and souls. I think I can tell you a secret that will help you to bring your faith and your science together and have a uniformed, informed faith. I think there's a way of understanding what is really true and how do we read these stories. We're going to talk about some tough questions. Remember Byron's question about the Old Testament God versus the New Testament God? We're going to explore that a little bit more. And I'm going to tell you a secret about the big one, about the biggest problem facing our church today. It's called the problem of suffering. It causes many people to fall away from the church when they expect God to take care of them instead of caring for them. And we're going to talk about what that means and how we don't have to lose our faith in God when cancer comes calling, or as we age or we experience loss in many forms. That's what happens to a lot of people. They're told that God will take care of them if they just pray hard enough, attend more church services, put something else in the offering plate, read their Bibles more faithfully. And then when they get into a medical mess and they find that cancer often takes people's lives, they lose their faith, unnecessarily so, at the very time they need to know that God is close by. We're going to talk about that, and I'm going to tell you that the best way to handle that is what I call secret number 6. I'm going to teach you about something called, or what I call, the colander of truth. And we're going to talk about anything else you want to talk about regarding the Bible. Well, thanks for joining me on our second round on Secrets of the Bible. If there's still questions you have, I hope you do have them. These are the ants in the pants of faith that keep us moving and keep us questioning and keep us searching for that God who is searching for us. Let the light of Christ burn brightly in your lives. Trust it, follow it, and join with Him on this great adventure of life. And I'll see you as soon as I get back from seeing those little grandkids. I can't wait to talk with you more about secrets of the Bible. Take care. Bye-bye.